We've covered CES in the past, but I think this year's consumer electronics show was actually a little bit more muted, only because it was kind of partially virtual. It was partially done in person. There was companies that didn't actually attend this year, more of them that didn't attend this year. So there was kind of a sense of, maybe there's a trend that maybe it might not be a thing going forward if too many of these companies start to pull out and just do their own events, because it's being proven during the pandemic that companies can just hold their own virtual events and don't need to bother, paying fees somewhere to, in a trade show hall to rent space or do any of that stuff. But having said that, there was still quite a bit that was interesting this year, and I did want to touch firstly on the Dell XPS 13 Plus laptop, because if I wasn't in the Apple ecosystem and I was going to buy a Windows laptop, the one that I would probably buy is the Dell XPS 13, even the older versions. The new version that they've pulled out, this Plus version, does look very futuristic, I think. It's kind of got a modern sort of sleek look to it, minimalist look to it. But having said that, it can have like the edge-to-edge keyboard. It can have the the touchpad that isn't actually discernible on the laptop. It can have the bezel-less experience and all that. But if it's still running Intel chips that run as hot as ovens, which apparently. We'll get to this a little bit later too. Intel did announce some new chips, but they're still running hot from what we can see. It just kind of puts you off. I mean, it's funny in looking at this particular laptop. While I was out, looking at some tech and in the shop and stuff the other day, and I was just having a look through all the Windows laptops. None of it still grabs me. In the sense that when you look at the cost for what you're paying for, the whole myth around Apple costing more just goes out the window as far as I'm concerned, because they're charging just as much for all these things.
Well, it's funny. I mean, as far as I'm concerned, I've had the M1 now for a few months, and it looks like probably any Apple laptop in the last 10 years, is a little bit thinner. But to me, the gap between Apple now, or this laptop now, and any of the PC offerings is as great as when I've got my first Macintosh 220 and versus a beige 386 box. That's how big the difference is. This is a way better computer.
Absolutely.
Way better.
Absolutely. And just to touch on some of those announcements that Intel had made, which I thought, and the part that I really wanted to focus on is, that's great. They've been, they'll say that they're innovating, but they're really reacting to the Apple Silicon transition and this use of sort of high performance cores and high efficiency cores, and they've now built chips that are coming that are going to have that kind of split happening between them. But I thought it was interesting that they showed off a particular chip. And they used the same graph that Apple used in terms of power efficiency and all that sort of thing. But then they claimed that their chip was above all the other lines from that same graph. But the thing that they don't point out is that, and this is where the M1 Pro and M1 Max chips are so impressive, is that regardless of whether you're plugged in or not, you're getting the performance, the 100% performance. Whereas you still have to be plugged in with these any laptop or machine that has these Intel chips in them. And they do say in the specs, like if the M1 Max chip is only needing to run at 30 watts, but the Intel chip is running at 115, that's where you get your nice toaster oven, high fan sort of experience. I'm sure they'll be able to deliver on performance, but I guess I still haven't seen anything in what they've announced that would suggest that they're really moving it along.
I think what's really interesting here is that Intel have been caught napping for the last decade. Apple have been working on these chips now, working with these chips in the iPads and their phones for over a decade. So they've actually probably got a lot more experience and a lot more capability when it comes to designing their silicon chips, as opposed to what Intel has. And Intel now is, probably looking at what Apple's got, probably pulling apart M1 Pros in the shed and saying, well, we can build that, and they probably can, but they don't have experience of running these in devices. They make chips, but they don't make laptops. And the difference is Apple has been making all-in-one devices now for 30 years, or if not longer. So they certainly know or have that experience within their company. So I think Intel, like you say, they might be able to have a chip that can be just like an M1 within 12 months, 18 months, but I think it'll be like another 3 or 4 years after that before they actually catch up.
Indeed. Just some other things I wanted to touch on from CES, just to round this out. There was a couple of interesting things. I think it was a BMW car that could change colour. Just at the flick of a switch. I thought that was kind of nifty. It felt very, Minority Report or something, something from the future where, I feel like going out in the car, I want the car to be black today, so I'll just flick a switch and it goes out like that. I like, this is the sort of thing I do enjoy at CES, where they announce that sort of stuff where it doesn't ever really seem like it'll be something, at least not anything soon, but it kind of catches your eye in that respect.
Yeah, I mean, I found it interesting looking through CES this year, and like the changing colour of the car, that's a technology that's been around 10 years. And what I actually thought that we've actually seen this year is probably a lot of the technologies that have existed for 5 or 6 years just in a better design form. So they look better. So if you look at the new screens or some of the other, robotic or, automated functions that you've got, these functions have been around now for 3 or 4 years. And if you go back to CES pre-pandemic, like people were showing up, with these concepts. Yeah. These now are still, they're still the same concept, but they're more refined. They're much closer to consumer sort of output if they decide to go ahead. Yeah. But, I think we're still at that. We're waiting for the next jump, whatever that technology might be, to allow us to take it. And I still don't think we're quite there yet.
I wonder if, particularly if you refer to mobile devices, etc., that battery to me seems to be the big thing that needs to be fundamentally overhauled. Yeah. We've said it before that if you get something like an iPhone or a Samsung phone or whatever, but you get a battery in there that lasts for a month between charges, then you've got a game changer sort of thing happening right there. Obviously, that would lead you to change the form factors themselves, because the batteries can last longer, but then you can think of a whole bunch of other series of tech that could be dramatically improved thanks to even just an overhaul of that, like being, maybe electric cars might be another example of that, where you get much more range and much more use out of it between charges.
Well, I think you're right. And I think if you think about processing power, that's really still, you're held back in your phone. And when I talk about that, I'm not talking about, video or anything like that. Obviously, we've got enough to do video for, 3-4 hours on your phone, well beyond probably what you can actually store on there. But I'm talking about other sort of technologies like voice recognition. So if you put everything into, say, something the size of a watch that lasts for a month without needing to charge, and you can talk your texts in there, you don't need to type anymore, and, you don't really care about viewing the screen, or you can use this to cast to any screen that might be in the vicinity, then suddenly, like you say, you've got a game-changing technology. But we'll see. We'll see what takes off. I mean, people still have a lot to say in whether or not a technology is actually viable.
Yeah, indeed. One last thing from CES was this, I believe it was called the Samsung Odyssey Arc, which was like a massive screen, curved screen that you could obviously put horizontally, but you could also twist and have it like stand up vertically, and in portrait mode, so that it goes, and because of the curve, it goes above your head. So I guess you get fully immersed in it or whatever. That's the sort of thing, like, you just kind of look at it and you go, yeah, that sounds like it might be fun. But it might also mean that we're moving towards an environment where we're just going to be enveloped by screens at some point.
Very true. I mean, look, let's face it, it's your own mini IMAX. person, like that, greater than your peripheral vision, curved, gives you the probably the full experience. But it's interesting that, now we're going to big screens for one person.
Yeah.
That's going to be a trend that I think, we might see more of in the future.